All right, I think we can start. So Prime Minister, ministers, ladies and gentlemen in the room, and also those viewing the event online. I understand there are many people actually viewing the event online, so the room is big and we have the people who are not there filling the room virtually. Welcome to this first OECD Global Forum on Building Trust and Reinforcing Democracy. My name is Martine Durand, and it's a real pleasure for me to be here today and be your Master of Ceremonies for this important day devoted to discussions on building trust and strengthening democracy, with representatives from governments, from civil society, from the media, and the private sector. This event precedes and actually will feed into the OECD ministerial meeting that will take place tomorrow on the same topic. I am really particularly pleased to be here today with you, as I was actually personally involved when I was the chief statistician at the OECD in the development of statistical guidelines for measuring trust in public institutions, something at the time that was judged completely, not crazy, but almost. The guidelines were drafted in 2011 as part of the OECD Better Life initiative, where we endeavored to measure people's and societal well-being, and where trust were considered as one core element of well-being. So, you know, I have a personal interest in this event. The work that we did at the time paved the way for the development of the OECD Trust Survey, on which actually this event is building on, and which actually the results are so enlightening that they will also feed the discussions today and tomorrow by ministers. But so much for history. Let me now, that's my role. I'm now going to address a few housekeeping matters, as we do usually when we start these events. First, interpretation. The meeting will take place in both English and French, with certain interventions that will be made in Spanish and in Ukrainian. Before the first speaker takes the floor in French, please check that your headsets are working perfectly. Refer to assistants in the room. There is staff from the OECD and from the organizers that can help you if you require a headset. At the end of the meeting, don't forget to leave your headsets. Please leave them on your seat so that it will be easier for the organizers to collect them afterwards. Second, an open lunch buffet will be served in the main foyer where you just had coffee outside this room. All participants are welcome to join. At the end of the day's discussion, there will also be an informal cocktail where also all participants are welcome to attend, and it will take place in the same area. Of course, we encourage you to share widely and discuss the event on social media with the hashtag reinforcing democracy. Please tweet, do whatever is necessary so that this event is widely reported and disseminated. But now, without further ado, I'm very pleased to welcome His Excellency the Prime Minister of Luxembourg, Monsieur Xavier Bettel, who is hosting our event today. Thank you really for that, as well as the OECD ministerial meeting tomorrow, along with Her Excellency Minister of Justice of Luxembourg, Mrs. Samantha Thompson. Welcome. And without further ado, Prime Minister, I'm going to give you the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen, firstly, let me welcome you all to Luxembourg. Tomorrow, I'm flying to Djerba for the French-speaking meeting of the Francophonie, so to be very supporting the Francophonie also in international institutions. I will continue soon my speech in French, so get ready to get your micro and headsets ready. But I would like to start by thanking, because you thank me for welcoming you, but I would like to thank all the team behind the work, if it's the OECD team or the Luxembourgish team who did a great work to make it possible to have this meeting today and tomorrow here, and also my colleague Sam Tanson for the leadership she has and also the personal energy she puts in this framework. And last but not least, I hope to see some of you again during the lunchtime. Alors, mesdames, messieurs, pour moi, c'est un honneur tout.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a very particular honor for me to say a few words of welcome on the occasion of this first global forum of the OECD, which title is Building Trust and Reinforcing Democracy. Well, speaking about democracy, I would like to relate it to the location where we are. This room and the room next door is used to organize councils of ministers at the European level. This institution, Europe, which is a peace project, and I'll come back to this situation on our continent. It was born, well, it was born in the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. It is one of the European capitals. The Great Duchy of Luxembourg is not only a city, it is more than 100 municipalities. You'll see that only a few meters away, there is the house where Robert Schuman, the father of Europe, was born. I used to be the mayor of the city of Luxembourg, and Mrs. Thompson here used to be the deputy mayor, and I'm proud to live in a country where more than 50% of the population doesn't have a Luxembourgish passport, and we have no elected representative from the extreme right wing, neither at the parliament nor in the town councils. We do not have in our DNA the attempt at doing things against somebody or against a group. We are very proud of this mixture of different cultures. I think it makes the strength of our country. Our country used to be a poor country, mainly populated with farmers, and many Luxembourgese people had to leave the country to be able to live, to make a living. Let's not forget that part of our history, that we once had to leave our home country to get a better life somewhere else. The need to organize a global forum under the title Building Trust and Reinforcing Democracy stems from a realization of failure. We thought that history was a linear progress towards emancipation in a world where democracy would become the unavoidable form of government for humankind. But that's not the case. The multiplication of very worrying events during these last years forces us to admit that this certainty is certainly not engraved in stone. Certain actors are working undercover to put into question our democratic societies. And these attempts have materialized in the Russian aggression against Ukraine. Russia is trampling over international rights, international law. They violate the sovereignty of an independent state. They create terrible suffering, but they also use disinformation to undermine the foundations of democracy, because democracy is the most feared enemy of dictatorial systems. And I would like to hail the courage of the Ukrainian people, who show a lot of courage to resist the attacker. These brave men and women are on the front lines to defend their values, their democratic system, and also ours. I was in Kiev and in Abuja a few months ago, and I saw things that I will never forget. I visited a lady who lived in a container because her flat had been destroyed. Her grandson was there, and I talked to the grandson, and he did not react. And she told me that he had lost his hearing because of the bombings, that she had lost everything, but that she still was in high spirits, that she wanted to keep fighting, and she didn't have anything left. I saw people with great courage. Most of us thought that this war was a question of days and that the Ukrainian people was going to be crushed by the Russian bulldozer. But it is that steadfastness, that the refusal to accept domination by their powerful neighbor, and thanks to international aid, Ukraine, we have realized that Ukraine is a real state. Let's not forget our own history. Nowadays, the Germans are our partners, are our friends, but at some point in history, the German neighbors thought they knew better what should become of a country, of another country. And in Luxembourg, we were crushed by the German bulldozers, steamrollers. If you walk around near Luxembourg City, you'll see there is a cemetery with thousands of soldiers, where thousands of soldiers are buried. American soldiers and soldiers of other nationalities, and most of them didn't even know where Luxembourg was before the war. Hadn't we benefited from international solidarity? Hadn't we benefited from the uprising of other peoples against the Nazi regime, we might not be here today. With my own history, my own DNA, I wouldn't have been entitled to live in this country. My grandfather is Jewish. My grandmother is Orthodox. And having Jewish blood and being a liberal, not being a Nazi, would have sentenced me to death. And I'm married to a Belgian man. So I would have been sentenced 3 times to death in my own country. So democratic values should never be forgotten. And I would like to quote the Austrian author Stefan Zweig, who wrote, "We didn't believe in the return to barbarism, as we didn't believe in witches and witch doctors. Our fathers really trusted tolerance and the reconciliation spirit. They sincerely thought that the borders between nations would gradually disappear and that peace and security, the most valuable of all, would be guaranteed to all men. Parallel lines can be drawn between Stefan Zweig's description of Europe before 1914 and the situation we know today. At the time, we thought that our democracies and the multilateral system would guarantee peace and security between nations. Unfortunately, this has not been the case. And other values are championed. But let's not be deceived. It is not the policies carried out by the Western world that are being criticized. It is our democracies that some people try to weaken. The Western world is not perceived as a threat by authoritarian regimes. It is the wish of democracy, the desire for democracy of their populations that is perceived as a threat, because democracy allows freedom, liberties, criticism, the capacity to choose one's own destiny, thus endangering their control over their population. Stefan Zweig keeps going, writing that he was the powerless witness of the return of humankind to a condition of barbarism that was long forgotten. We could have believed that that world belonged to past times, but unfortunately we see today that it's not the case. Let's not be the powerless and defenseless witnesses faced with a world that we believed belonged to the past. Let's keep championing our democratic values, and let's remember what we knew on our territory. I told you earlier, I'm going to say something very hard, but for those who find it hard to understand the democratic values, and how far humans can go. Go and visit Auschwitz. You'll see rooms filled with hair, with shoes, with prostheses, with glasses, with suitcases, only with a name and a date. And Auschwitz was not a machine, was not a robot. Human beings did that. Ladies and gentlemen, your presence here at this forum is an encouraging signal. You don't accept fatalism. You're decided, you're determined to work to strengthen democracy, to reinforce democracy for our country, for the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg, for my government, for my colleague. It is a very important appointment. For a country such as mine, that was shaken by the political choices of its large neighbors, the spirit of conciliation is the indispensable witness of democratic societies, and it is the safest cement of our peace and security. It is the reason why our country is very much in favor of multilateralism and is ready to commit to taking up the challenges our societies have to cope with. This conciliation spirit is the basis of the Luxembourg spirit. And it is the red thread that we find everywhere in the policies decided here. We are always working for military peace and social peace. We have the model that we call tripartite. A little while ago, we were together with the social partners, the trade unions, the employers, to try and find solutions to this very serious problem we're facing today, which is inflation, without crushing the economy. By raising the salaries by 12.5%, the inflation rate, which is unbearable for the economy, but taking into account the fact that the prices of foodstuffs and staples are so high that the lives of the citizens become increasingly difficult. And we reached an agreement as a result of the tripartite. And the last general strike we had in Luxembourg dates back to my childhood, while in other countries, strikes are their daily bread. Almost. We can't help seeing that. Promoting democracy requires commitment, devotion. It is not something which is just one shot. It is a long-term job. We need to protect our democracy. We need to protect the values it promotes. A populist will always provide the shortest answer to the most complicated question, while a Democrat will invariably give a more complicated answer to the shortest possible question. Let's not fall in the trap of populism and simplification. We can see that in other countries where other traditional parties are running behind populists and try to reach them, to catch up with them. It's only making it easier for populists. Trying to imitate them only makes it easier for them. We encourage diversity of opinion. Democracy encourages diversity of opinions, and the democracy is the capacity of managing that diversity of opinions in a society. And it encourages us in our combat against disinformation. Investment in journalism, freedom of speech is the first pillar. Investing in journalism, even within the European Union, in certain countries, journalists are not free to say whatever they want. Judges are not free to make decisions without being at risk of being laid off. So I'm not speaking of extra-European countries. I'm speaking about countries of the European Union. We need to rebuild the trust, that citizens should have in the institutions and political powers. And the spread of misleading and disinformation is undermining the trust of the citizens in our political institutions. We saw that with the COVID crisis, even though in the past we went through crisis in the trust in. Well, during that time, we witnessed a crisis, the emergence of a crisis of the of trust in science, in physicians, in politics and politicians, crises that broke up families between vaccinated and non-vaccinated relatives. Some people were putting into question the contribution of science. We witnessed that, we saw that with the fake news. It's so important to report on those fake news. I was elected at the parliament 23 years ago. 23 years ago, policies made the news. Nowadays, politics must put forward arguments to defend the position of the decision makers. Now, our politicians, our political leaders, we political leaders, we must respond to fake news, to disinformation. We must oppose that. We are no longer taking the lead. We should work on that. And I would also like to speak about the drivers of trust in the political institutions and public institutions. You will look at those drivers. It will give us an idea of what our priority fields of action should be. I've just spoken about COVID, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank the OECD for the work we've carried out together because after the crisis, there have never been as many COVID specialists among our population that during the crisis. I think there wasn't even one MP that didn't know everything. There were specialists about everything. And it's very important to look at what we do from the outside. Most people will say, well, we did everything well. And the opposition will say, you did everything wrong. But for me, the important aspects of a new situation is the learning part. Can we learn the lessons from what we've done well and continue on the same track? And learn from what we have done wrong. And we've asked the OECD to carry out a study for us to learn what had been done well and what had been done wrong. And we want, what it is very important for us in Luxembourg, to include MPs in each decision-making process. We had a crisis unit, of course, but that, and we did with that parliament sometimes, but that should be exceptional. That cannot govern current affairs. It takes more time, but that's democracy. And it's very enlightening for many. And I would like to thank the institutions for operating in a more or less normal way. When I speak about exceptional functioning, exceptional situation, I'm a liberal elected politician in a government that defends democratic values. And the hardest decision was to restrict people's liberties, tell people you can't go out. You have to go back home before curfew. You cannot meet your relatives for your birthday, and tell shopkeepers that they could no longer open their shops. For some people, it had become a permanent situation, and they found it difficult to cope when they were giving back their liberties. Can you imagine that? Some people wanted to close everything, wanted total lockdown, and others wanted to keep everything open. We had to strike a balance between restrictions and liberties without never ever forgetting that liberties should be the spinal cord of any decision we make. Ladies and gentlemen, democracy means devotion. It's not enough to proclaim our attachment to democratic principles. It's very easy to make a beautiful speech and say I'm in favor of democracy. It is a matter of service and promotion of one's ideals. And we should be very honest to ourselves. Even in countries with very long democratic traditions, I told you earlier, we see that the trust in public institutions is eroding. And we cannot remain insensitive to that. We have to reverse the trend. We have to reduce the gap between the democratic will of our citizens and the perception by the citizens of the political decisions made by their representatives. The expectations of our citizens in terms of representation and transparency and integrity of the institutions have changed. We need to reassert our devotion to these foundations of democracy. This second pillar of the foundations of democracy is the right to political expression. We have to take into account the expectations of the citizens in terms of political representation in order to strengthen that representation and the opening of public life and give more opportunities to support an inclusive public policies. And it's not always easy to do it. We experienced that a few weeks ago when 100 citizens, which we didn't choose, but which were chosen by university and a polling institute, people that represented the different faces of our country. And we asked them, what do you think about our environmental policies? What can we do? And we realized that the population was ahead of us and that very often we are afraid to make the right and difficult decisions to take up the climate challenges, especially as compared to the expectations of our people. And the people's proposals must be listened to. We cannot abstain from having a political debate about these proposals. And using the participation as an alibi and say, well, you participate, but then we decide. That doesn't work. That can't work. It's a mistake to say we're legitimate because we were elected. That's the biggest mistake, thinking that legitimacy is granted, to take legitimacy for granted for 5 years just because you've been elected. In a democracy, political leaders, political decision makers have to listen and respond in a non-opportunistic way. And I have an example. On the next day of the rape of a child, 80% of the population will say that they're in favor of the death sentence for the rapist. Let's not fall into the trap of making a decision on the spur of the moment. Let's not fall into the trap of wanting to respond to a mass desire. I used to be a lawyer, and I know that in our societies, people were sentenced to death, even though they were innocent. Let's not fall for the Facebook messages we get. Let's not fall for sensationalism. We need to be able to listen and listen to nuances. If we had said at the time, if we had asked the people at the time of the Treaty of Rome whether they wanted France, Germany, and Italy to do something together, most people would have said no. So sometimes there is a need for showing political courage and explaining to the population the reasons. So for me, politics is first of all, wanting a decision, then advising, listening, advising the different actors, and then making a decision without forgetting to explain. And that's very often the problem we have, that we forget to explain. We can see that democracy is a fragile it's something fragile. We must protect it for the future generations and for the previous generations who fought and sometimes gave their lives for democratic values. A democratic regime will never be finished. Democracy demands attention, constant commitment, and sometimes it's complicated, but all this is indispensable to secure the continuity of democracy. In this context, we need to take into account technological progress. Just remember, 15, 20 years ago, you were called on the phone, a journalist asked for a piece of information and said, I need it for tonight, 7 o'clock, because I have to print it. Now there is a race for information because they are trying to get out the first news that will get the most clicks.
So against that background, we could challenge the traditional mechanism, or at least in this analog world that we are living in today, we need to find the right answers to give. And we shouldn't repeat the same mistakes as we did in the past. And to quote Stefan Zweig again, well, we should not think that the human progress is leading to moral progress. So digitalization represents many challenges with regard to democracy and others, but the digital transition also allows citizens to better express their concerns. So there are good things and bad things with the digital revolution, as with any revolution, because it goes so fast. Today, with your phone, you can broadcast. You are all broadcasters. At the beginning, a telephone was made to call others, but today, with our phones, we can film, we can take images. There are young people who commit suicide because they find film videos of themselves on TikTok because of moral harassing. And so we need to seize the opportunities of the digital revolution and avoid falling into the traps of that revolution. So we need to make the most of these digital tools while being aware of the challenges that these represent. So it will be difficult, it will be complicated, but that is something we need to do. And finally, at international level, and the third pillar of this forum, we have to live up to our world responsibilities, and we have to strengthen the resilience of democracy in front of the foreign forces in a globalized world. Ladies and gentlemen, democracy remains the only governing system that allows that makes it possible to keep an inclusive society, a prosperous society, through a self-assessment process and through the self-improvement process that needs to be an ongoing process. So before concluding, I would like to warmly thank the Deputy Secretary, General Secretary, Mrs. Kiri Engines, and for the work they've done to prepare this high-level forum. I would also like to thank my colleague, Sam Tanson, for her commitment. Ladies and gentlemen, your presence here, attendance is key. It's a strong commitment into the democratic values that we all want to protect together. But we are reaching a turning point. We have experienced the Cold War. Everybody thinks that the future world will be a bipolar world, so with those standing for democratic values and those standing against democratic values. What I can tell you is that even if standing for democratic values is not popular for some, we need to keep on standing for those. And I may allow you to say something we all experience on a daily basis. We are all here convinced that we need to defend democracy. But when we take part in a Christmas party or when we hear someone saying things that we cannot accept, don't remain quiet. Speak up. Don't just think this is unacceptable. Say it loud. Say that you do not that you not agree with what is being said, with what is not acceptable. Because there is one thing that I do not tolerate. It's not intolerance. So we all have to be intolerant with regard to those who do not stand for democratic values. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Premier Ministre.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for this very important message. Thank you for reminding us of the latest developments and reminding of the democratic values and the need to respond to challenges individually and collectively. Thank you once again for your speech, Prime Minister.
Prime Minister of Belgium, Alexander De Croo. I don't know.
Ladies and gentlemen, over the past decades, we have made incredible progress as OECD countries. People's standard of living improved. Our economies grow through ups and downs. Our prosperity grew. All this has been possible through cooperation between people and cooperation between countries. Cooperation that is above all based not on rules, not on control, but on trust. Trust creates a safe environment for people to live and to flourish. Trust makes our markets work. Trust builds strong democracies. As the sociologist Robert Putnam indicated in his research on trust in societies, trust is the most important social capital in a society. If society thrives, it is because there is an abundance of trust. But the trust in our societies has often been tested, and it is being challenged again today. It is being challenged by the fourth industrial revolution. The digitalization of our societies and economies generates tremendous opportunities. It connects us to each other as never before. It brings government services closer to their citizens, businesses closer to their consumers, to their customers. It is a catalyst for transparency, for democracy, and human development. But at the same time, cyber attacks, phishing, and hacking are undermining trust. Not to mention new technologies like deepfake that blur the line between fiction and reality. And let us not forget the undermining force of senseless aggressions, such as Russia's illegal war in Ukraine today. Just like the polarization in our societies, it creates uncertainty and feeds distrust. Yet, in spite of all of this, I am confident because I also have seen what can be achieved in the past decades. At times when trust was being challenged, we always found new solutions and new progress through cooperation and human ingenuity. But above all, we always succeeded because trust is unlimited and endless. It is not a scarce resource that can be lost, but a driver of human progress, a human trait we can learn and grow through human effort. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister De Croo, for these words. It is now my immense pleasure to warmly welcome His Excellency Minister of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine, Mr. Ole Nemchikov. OECD member countries, yes, I think we can start applauding right now. Thank you so much, Minister, for being with us today. As you know, Minister, and everybody knows, OECD member countries have condemned Russia's illegal war of aggression against Ukraine in the strongest possible terms and stand in solidarity with the people of Ukraine and with the democratically elected government of Ukraine. Minister, I know it's probably not been an easy journey for you to come to Luxembourg and be with us today, especially given the latest development of the past few days in the Ukraine, and in particular that have affected also the region of Kiev and the borders with Poland. We really truly appreciate the effort you have made, and I think it is really important, frankly, to have the presence of Ukraine at this particularly hard moment that the Prime Minister of Luxembourg has recalled just a moment ago. Your presence and your input today are critical for us to remain aware and to make sure that the things that are happening today will never happen again, and of the geopolitical dangers that exist and threaten to endanger our democracies. The keynote by the minister will be in Ukrainian, so interpretation will be provided via the headsets. Minister, I now give you the floor, and thank you again.
Шановний пане прем'єр-міністр, шановні колеги, в мене була підготовлена гарна мотиваційна промова з подякою всім нашим.
Thank you very much for welcoming me. I would like to thank all the European colleagues for their endless support during these very difficult times that we are going through. For 1 hour and 40 minutes, the Ukrainian territory is under air alert once again. I'm here in the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg, but still I cannot keep thinking about the very harsh reality of Ukraine today. 2 missiles have been launched on Kiev. 4 missiles have hit Dnipro. 6 missiles on Odessa. Missiles on Vinnytsia. children are dying. Many people are injured in Dnipro. And I'm just talking about the 40 last minutes. So many people have been injured and have died in the last 40 minutes. So I cannot stop from checking my smartphone. It's very difficult for me to disconnect from that reality. And my first reaction when I go somewhere is to ask where I can take refuge, where I can give a shelter, I can find a shelter, and where I can protect myself. That is what my country has been living for 9 months, especially the inhabitants of the major Ukrainian cities. But I would like to try and focus on what I have prepared to tell you today. It is my duty, it is the duty of our country to sincerely warmly thank the OECD members, the community of the OECD countries. I am here taking part in this forum, and I am here as a guest. I do not represent a country member to the OECD. Nonetheless, I would like to reassert that Ukraine has committed itself in going down that road and finally becoming a member to OECD. Since last February, in spite of the war, we have been making progress on the standards, on reforms to be up to the standards of the member countries of OECD, and all this in spite of the war waging in Ukraine. And about the standards and about the history of Ukraine, well, actually, the history of Ukraine has always been a fight to be up, to be in line with the democratic standards. I have paid much attention to the references of the history made by the Prime Minister of Luxembourg. The history of Ukraine shares a lot with the history of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. It's a history that has been a shaken country, that have been all the time shaken. And our fight for freedom dates back to much earlier than 2014. But I would like to refer to the revolution of dignity. Today, Ukraine does represent a territory of a freedom, a democracy threatened by Russia, by Belarus, that has lent its territory to allow Russia to wage war on Ukraine. Russia is terrorizing Ukraine, the Ukrainian people, with the slaughterings in Bucha and Izun when these territories were occupied, and now in at other places where we have discovered mass graves. And the only guarantee we have to stand for our freedom, for our lives, is to fight for democracy. And the Ukrainians do defend democracy in Ukraine, but also they also stand for democracy in Europe and throughout the world. I am very proud of what has been said before giving me the floor. So thank you very much for your support. And I sincerely hope that we will be able to convene this kind of forum in Mariupol or in another Ukrainian city soon. So after all that has happened, it is very important to build trust again, around our values. And In that way, Ukraine is a full member of the community of European values, and Ukraine is ready to do its best to achieve that objective. Since the 24th of February this year, the Ukrainian government has been working 24 hours a day, and the Ukrainian President Zelensky is working 24 hours a day. Relentlessly, and we have been able to keep the public services alive, operational. The Ukrainian parliament has held all its sessions, even when the Russians were at 40 kilometers from Kiev. And currently, we realize how important it is to keep the momentum and to remain committed to make the public institutions resilient. So thanks to that, the Ukrainian state can still operate, can still fulfill its missions. And we can keep on working of what had started before the 24th of February. So I would like to thank you for the invitation. I would also like to thank all the governments, all the peoples that support Ukraine during these very difficult times. Long life to Ukraine.
Thank you so much, Minister Neshmikov, I'm sorry, I'm misspelling your name, Nemchinov, we are really very impressed by the courage of the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian government to defend the democratic values that we all attach to. And we also deeply appreciate the efforts that the Ukrainian government is making, even during the time of war, to actually undertake the reforms necessary to join the OECD and adhere to the EU values. Really, you should be commended for this. Thank you again. Finally, I would like to invite OECD Deputy Secretary General, Carrie Ann Jones, to come to the lectern. Thank you.
Deputy Prime Minister Patel, Prime Minister Arden, Minister Nemichov, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Let me start by thanking Minister Sam Tansen for hosting this global forum that brings the voices of democracy together to discuss the challenges that democracy is facing. The views from civil society, partner countries, and business that we will hear today will feed into tomorrow's ministerial meeting. The case for action to strengthen our democracies is clear. The esteemed speakers that have addressed you before me have very, very eloquently made the case. All of this in the context of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, a cost of living crisis, recovery from a global pandemic, and a long-standing climate emergency. While we are seeing some promising signs of increased political participation around the world, we see youth taking the lead in the fight against climate change. We see global mobilization for women's rights. We see racial justice movements. The challenge for democracy still remains stark. Even in the most well-established democracies, these trends are testing our institutions, and they are hindering government's ability to deliver progress for our citizens. Although understanding the why these trends are happening is very important, let me talk to you today about how we can address these challenges. As many of you know, OECD like-mindedness is based on a set of shared fundamental values. They include a commitment to pluralistic democracy based on the rule of law and the respect of human rights. And let me add here that one of democracy's unique strengths is the ability to acknowledge its weakness, its imperfections, and to respond to them openly and transparently. Over a year ago, OECD members, through the Public Governance Committee, took the important step of agreeing that strengthening trust in government and reinforcing democracy should become a priority. Since then, the members, with the support of OECD staff, have worked hard on establishing a clear and ambitious agenda through the OECD Reinforcing Democracy Initiative. The initiative stands on solid ground. It is underpinned by the first OECD Trust Survey, an exercise where 22 OECD countries took a key first step to understand what drives trust in government. This was not necessarily a comfortable step, but it was a critical one. For government action to be effective in a democracy, a sufficient number of citizens need to trust their government. You'll hear more about these results of the survey in the next session. Members then identified 5 key governance challenges for democracies. These are reflected in each of the sessions of this global forum, and they are also discussed in a publication, Building Trust and Reinforcing Democracy, Preparing the Ground for Government Action, that is launched today. Let me walk you through these quickly. First, tackling mis- and disinformation. As we have heard from the Prime Minister, as we have heard from our Ukrainian colleague, disinformation is polarizing public debate, undermining public's willingness to engage in democratic society, and hampering consensus building in society. Governments are grappling with this challenge. The questions they face include, how do we ensure an information ecosystem that makes democracy robust and inclusive, that reinforces rule of law, upholds freedom of speech, and promotes debate based on evidence? These all need a whole-of-society approach to address them. Second, strengthening citizen representation and participation. The OECD Trust Survey tells us that a majority of citizens no longer feel they have a voice. Fewer than 1/3 of respondents, for example, believe the government would adopt opinions that they expressed in a public consultation. How do we adapt to this growing and evolving expectation of citizens with all of the new forms of communication that surround us? How do we ensure effective representation in today's context? Third, building the capacities of government. A growing number of global challenges are testing our democracy's rule-based trading system. Protecting our open societies, preserving democracy, and ensuring well-functioning global markets and a global level playing field are a priority. How do we build this capacity of democracies to have resilience and tackle global challenges whilst protecting themselves from external threats? Fourth, governing green. Climate change is a prime example of a global challenge that democracies are grappling to address. Only 35% of respondents from the OECD Trust Survey were confident that their governments will succeed in meeting their climate goals. How can democracies transform the way they govern to effectively address climate? And fifth, which we've heard from the Prime Minister, the digital democracy. Our democratic institutions were developed for an analog world. Digitalization presents both opportunities and challenges for democracies. How are we responding to both? This is quite a significant set of challenges to address that touches on our shared values. I think you will agree with me in saying that to succeed in addressing them, we cannot work alone. That is the main point of today's Global Forum. This event gathers an amazing blend of minds, decision makers, academia, civil society, international organizations, and representatives from all walks of life. We have a unique opportunity to explore together an action-oriented agenda to rebuild trust in public institutions and discuss the key public governance challenges to democracy. Your discussion today will be heard by the ministers of OECD countries tomorrow when they discuss the concrete actions they plan to take to reinforce our democracies. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to discuss together how to deepen and protect our democratic institutions and how to make them better. We need to think of new approaches, new forms of collaboration, new forms of accountability and oversight, and policy frameworks that are appropriate to this moment in time. A governance model that proves that democracy is self-preserving, fit for change, and up to tackle the challenges that are here and those that are to come. I invite you to be creative and bold in today's discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carrie-Anne. Well, this marks the end of the opening of the Global Forum. I think we can really thank our keynote speakers today, who have shown the level of ambition that the countries and the OECD have in our topics, and also in their speeches, they have set the path for our very important discussions during the course of the day. So please join me again in a big round of applause. As Deputy Secretary General just mentioned, the OECD is launching today this very important book. So let me show it to you so that you can't miss it. I don't know if there will be copy outside the rooms. If there are, please grab one. Otherwise, of course, you'll find it on the internet site of the OECD. But not only take it, but read it, because it's it makes a very, very good read. It's not sometimes, at the OECD, we publish these big, fat reports that we call door stoppers. We put that at the door so that they can stop the door from flapping. But this is not such a book. This is a very important book. So please read it. Don't use it as a door stopper. It's really great work that has been done and needs to continue developing and deepening in the months and years to come, actually, because that's an agenda ahead that is very large, but we'll also benefit very much from the conversations today. So thank you again to our distinguished speakers, and let us now move on to the first plenary session of the day, Trust in Public Institutions. Thank you. I invite you to leave the podium.